Okay, second session. I'm gonna run this a little bit differently because the first bit of my presentation is going to be on communication breakdown, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the phraseology that we use in our industry. Some of it's well understood, and some of it's not well understood, both between controllers, but also from our pilots as well. The second session, or the second part of my presentation, is actually a series of questions. So it's more a point-and-shoot question and answer session. We had a lot of pilots interested in this symposium, but unfortunately, with our type of work, we can't all attend. So I had a number of different topics and questions emailed to me from pilots that would really appreciate your perspective and your answers. As I said, many of them are point-and-shoot questions. They're quite easy to answer. And what I'd ask for is, as we start going through some of them, if I could get air traffic control in the respective field, whether it's departure, arrival, tower, whatever, if one of you wouldn't mind taking the question for me, just have a look at the microphone button in front of you, grab the microphone, don't put it too close, and give us a nice quick answer. I've got Lucy over there as our General Secretary from Hong Kong ALPA, and what she's going to do with me is help to collate some of these answers so that we can get them back out to the pilots that aren't able to be here. Sound good? All right. So the first part. The first thing I want to talk to you about is minimum fuel. This is a call that, as pilots, we hope we never have to make. But it's very important that when we do make it, there's a common understanding between pilots and cabin crew, pilots and air traffic controllers, of what it is we're talking about. And to be honest, not all of our pilots fully understand this concept yet. So this is both education for controllers as well as pilots. So when we're coming into Hong Kong, we have to carry two sets of fuel, which we call minimum diversion fuel. The first fuel that we have to carry is final reserve fuel. This is 30 minutes of fuel that's regulated by CAD 360 document. We have to carry this. If we ever fall below this, we're in a Mayday fuel situation. There's no choice. Some member states do not require carriers to file an alternate, have fuel available and file an alternate on their IFR flight plans. Hong Kong is one of them that does require it. So we also carry with us alternate fuel. And I've given you two examples. These are just random examples based on a regional Boeing 777-300 aircraft. So in this case, we've got a final reserve fuel, 30 minutes of, we'll call it 2.9 tons, and an alternate fuel for Macau of 3 tons, which is also about 30 minutes of fuel. So this gives us a minimum fuel of 5.9 tons. That's what we're expecting to arrive with. Now, of course, we carry contingency fuel as well, so if we have to deviate around weather, Cathay and Dragonair also run a performance-based contingency, which is a statistical model. So they look at the history of flights in and out for every flight, corrected for seasonality, and they come up with a useful contingency fuel so that in most cases, we will never end up having to make this minimum fuel call. But in this example, we come into Hong Kong and we'll say that there's adverse weather. So there's 15 minutes of holding somewhere in the Hong Kong FIR. So if we end up in a situation where we have 5.9 tons or more expected for our arrival based on this 15 minutes, what do we have to do? Absolutely nothing. There's no intervention required, and this represents the vast majority of our flights. If we are looking at less than 5.9 tons, that does not mean we have to proceed to an alternate right away. We have, under certain criteria, the ability to either throw away the alternate, which means we then commit to Hong Kong, or, depending on the weather in Hong Kong, if it is possible we would end up in a go-around situation and unable to land, there's a very good chance that the captain of the aircraft could be looking at an early diversion. So what about 5.6 tons? Do we call minimum diversion fuel now? We've given away our alternate, we're staying in Hong Kong, and we're now below min-div. Now what not all pilots understand at this point is we are not yet in a minimum diversion situation, a minimum fuel call situation. We are able to accept a little bit of further delay. If, for example, we were to be delayed another 5 or 10 minutes, we still wouldn't fall below the 2.9 ton requirement that we have to have for final reserve fuel. So again, we say nothing. But now there's a runway change in Hong Kong. So due to shifting winds, they're now switching the runways around, and we can expect an additional 15 minutes of holding. And now our fuel is, we're 3.2 tons for landing. So what do we do now? This is when you can expect the pilots will give you a minimum fuel call. It should be declared, which is basically telling you as the controller that no additional delay can be expected based on the clearance you've given them at that point. Guaranteed by this point, the pilot will be asking you questions like, how long is my holding time? And they might also be trying to cue you into the fact that they are approaching a minimum fuel state. If it falls below 2.9 at any point in time, you can expect a Mayday call. Very rare in this part of the world, hopefully, but it does happen from time to time. As I said, pilots will try to keep you informed. We don't leave it to the last minute. In fact, as part of good airmanship, very often we will start planning the diversion well before we get to that point and give ourselves a few hundred kilos buffer. On our aircraft, in a wide-body jet, we're looking at about 100 kilos per minute in the air. So we might give ourselves 5 minutes, which would be an extra 500 kilos of fuel before we even start that. But we also have to look at where we are in the fuel, in the holding stack. So pilots will try and inform air traffic control, but we will not use terminology that can be ambiguous. Things like, we're running out of fuel up here, doesn't have any meaning to controllers. And this is one of the things that happened in the Avianca disaster in New York, that the pilots were trying to convey through a sort of hint and hope strategy that they were running out of fuel, and the air traffic controllers didn't understand. So that's really the big reason we have these two very important calls. So what does the minimum fuel call actually mean? It means that based on the current clearance, the anticipated fuel remaining is approaching the final reserve fuel. It means that we are committed to land at that specific airport. No other ERAs are available for us. We've given them away. Any further delay, and again, this could depend on how many minutes of buffer the pilot gives, any further delay could cause a Mayday fuel call. And so you have to be prepared to anticipate that. What the pilots also have to understand is this also says in point 2, we are committed to land at this specific airport. There was a case early on of a pilot going all the way through Japan airspace and Taiwan airspace, and every controller he talked to, he declared min fuel because he had no contingency fuel, and he threw out his alternate. But the point is, he could have landed in Japan, he could have landed in Taipei. He hadn't actually given up all his options. To call minimum fuel means you don't have any more options. You're committed to this airport, and you are approaching Mayday fuel. But the aircraft under minimum fuel is still operating normally. In other words, we aren't expecting, nor can we ask for, any special treatment. No jumping the queue. I know you're watching out for that. And of course, this is an ICAO standard phraseology. This is contained in PANS Doc 4444. So it does have universal meaning to both sides. Now, people have asked, why don't we have a call for a situation where we've thrown away the airport? Why don't we tell people that in advance? And the reason ICAO tells us is that not all states recognize the need to have an alternate airport on their IFR plans, and therefore they don't want to have a set of terminology that doesn't apply to all member states across the board. So what does this look like practically? Well, thanks to Cathay Pacific line operations, I've got a 2-month summary of what our previous aircraft have done and come into Hong Kong with. And what you can see is even a minimum fuel call is a relatively infrequent event. Basically 97, 96 to 99% of our flights are going to arrive here with 45 minutes or more. This is a 2-month average. Where it gets a little tricky, and it's probably in large part because of the size of the band being 30 to 45 minutes, some of our flights could arrive very close to that minimum fuel call. In particular, the last 2 months, you could see the 747. 6% of flights are arriving with between 30 and 45 minutes. But then you look at the 777-300 or the 330, it's less than 1%. And of course, as you'd expect, 0% of our flights have arrived with 30 minutes, or less than 30 minutes. You haven't had any Mayday calls in the last 2 months, at least not from Cathay Pacific, I hope.